morning. Thanks for being with us. This is the CSJ Social Justice Hub. The title of this morning's talk is Reigniting the Northern Engine. And we're a little short on time, so I'm going to sort of skip over introductions, do them very, very quickly, and then get straight into the discussion. To my left, we have Kevin Hollingreich, MP, Member of Parliament for... I'm so sorry. Thank you very much.
Thank
We've
you,
got a representative in the House. I like that.
Constituent, yeah.
Fantastic. And Minister for Enterprise Markets and Small Business. To his left, we have Tina Hughes, who's the Director of Marketing and Digital and External Affairs for the Yorkshire Building Society, who we are very grateful for supporting this event this morning and allowing us to have this conversation. To my right, Esther McVeigh, Member of Parliament for Tatton, and former, as we were just talking about, Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. And to Esther's right, we have Jo Sanders-Potts, who is the Chief Executive of the Hinge Centre, a fantastic small charity that works in Bridlington that at the CSJ we've had the pleasure of working with over the last couple of years. So, this morning's title, Reigniting the Northern Engine. A lot is said about the north-south divide. Sometimes it's on the sort of slightly silly end of sort of where Pret-a-Manger ends and Greggs begins, is sort of where the line is drawn. Obviously, in other ways, much more serious. We've heard this week from the government about their plan for towns, investing in towns. And of course, if anybody's listened to the radio or put a television on this morning, there is a small question about infrastructure, particularly rail infrastructure and HS2 as well, which obviously plays into this conversation a lot. So with that, I will hand over to the Minister. We're going to do about 5 minutes from each panellist, and then we'll take questions. So please do have a think about your questions in advance. Kevin, over to you.
Thank you, Nathan. Well, I know it won't take a lot to depress you on a rainy day in Manchester, a great rainy day in Manchester, great city though it is. But I think the first thing we've got to look at when we look at trying to level up the country, which we absolutely want to do, is the scale of the challenge. So if we look at the economic differential, the productivity differential per capita between the northeast of England, I know we're not in the northeast and northwest, and it's slightly better off in the northwest, but not a lot, and London, the southeast, the differential in relative terms is as wide as it was between East and West Germany prior to reunification. Now that took 30 years and $2 trillion to narrow that gap, and it's still about 20% away from parity. So it's a huge, huge challenge. We're not going to solve this problem within a few months or a few years or even a parliament. It's going to take lots and lots of parliament. So it's absolutely key that we get this right. In terms of, I think the exam question for me was what a small business can do about it, and I'm a massive advocate of small business, having been in business myself for 30 years, so I'm a bit biased, and being a business minister. So, but absolutely, it is everything to do with it. And I'll tell you why. Because you look at productivity, we've got to, if you want to understand where prosperity comes from, it all comes from productivity. And prosperity is the reason we're all in politics. So 7,000 years ago, we weren't very productive. We actually managed to eat every day what we collected off the trees and caught in the rivers and the seas. We were hunter-gatherers. And somebody came up with the bright idea about 7,000 years ago to plant something in their back garden, so to speak, and to grow stuff. And actually, that was far more productive than actually going around hunting for stuff every day. I created a surplus, and the surplus then could be sold, so that money came as a result, and writing came as a result of recording money, and all those things happened. So all literature actually emanated from productivity too, and that created money and created taxation and created all the, obviously, public services came as a result. So not only can business help with the productivity, it also pays for all the public services. And Churchill himself said this, of course. He said that private enterprise is a strong horse that pulls the whole cart. There will be no public services without private enterprise. So yes, I'm biased, but it's an absolute fact that we need to make sure that SMEs and business generally drives the levelling up agenda. And before we get too depressed, I won't depress you too much about levelling up, because I think it's a wonderful opportunity and absolutely right that that we focus on this. I remember Esther talking about we're like an aeroplane flying on one engine in the UK, and I think it's a very good analogy of where we are. So a great opportunity for the UK generally in terms of levelling up. But actually the UK has got a very good story to tell in terms of its economy today. We're the 8th largest manufacturer in the world. We were 9th. We've just overtaken France, which is no bad thing. We are the 5th in terms of global trade. We were 6th 2 years ago, so that's going in the right direction. We're the 3rd fastest growing economy since 2010 and since the pandemic, faster than any major European country. We're the 2nd largest exporter of services in the world. We're number 1 in terms of the league table of universities, and we have the top university in the world, still, of course, in Oxford. So lots and lots of good things about the UK, but lots and lots of things we could do better, of course. So in terms of levelling up, yes, of course, infrastructure. But as the 2 different economists have a say in this in terms of how we do this. Andy Haldane, of course, probably the economist I respect most in the UK, former chief economist of the Bank of England, said connectivity is hugely important. So it feeds into your point, Nathan, about what we do, decisions we make in terms of roads, railways, and of course the stuff like broadband. So that's really important. But as Mark Littlewood argues, if it was all about connectivity, why isn't Doncaster more prosperous? Because Doncaster is a very well connected town, yet it is not very prosperous. And the exam question of that, in terms of the underlying problem, is private sector investment. It's absolutely critical. So how do we make this happen? Lots of different things, of course. Devolution is really important, and Manchester has a trailblazing devolution deal, and that can feed into skills, of course, which is very important, and inward investment, which is the primary purpose, I think, of devolution is inward investment, economic development. But all what we've got to do is contained within the work I do and work with different delegated authorities around the UK in terms of making sure that SMEs particularly have the best possible chance of starting up and scaling up. The UK has a very strong record in terms of startups. We're number 1 in the OECD per capita in terms of numbers of startup businesses. We're 13th in terms of scale-ups. So if you look at businesses that are 10 employees or more after 3 years, we are 13th in the OECD league table. So that's where we've got to get right. The 3 buckets we're trying to fill in my job were access to finance, support and advice, and removing barriers to trade. And I can go into these more detail, and I'll probably use most of my time, so I know the other panellists, but access to finance is probably the most critical. We've done a lot in terms of things like startup loans. We've lent £1 billion in startup loans because we saw market failure at the bottom end of the marketplace. Access to finance for people who don't have sources of finance, for example, from their parents. So startup loans, 100,000 loans, £1 billion has gone out in those. But we'll probably see a market fairly above that level too, which we're working on now. Things like regional mutual banks, I think, is a real opportunity for the future. A feature of every other G7 economy, apart from the UK, back to kind of proper relationship banking, which I think is sorely needed. And we're already doing things like the Northern Paris Investment Fund that's providing financing to the marketplace, but there's more we can do in terms of the regional funds. But I'll conclude there from my remarks, but keen to go into more detail if people would like to see it later on, Nathan.
Brilliant. Kevin, thank you very much. I'm going to go straight to Tina after that.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'll echo the sentiment of well done for braving that rain, but no trip to Manchester would be complete without it. So I'm Tina Hughes. I'm a Director of Digital and Marketing at Yorkshire Building Society. I think Kevin has just talked a little bit about skills being so important to the Levelling Up agenda, and it's certainly something here at Yorkshire Building Society we've been very, very thoughtful about. In March, we actually put together and launched the Yorkshire and Humber Financial and Professional Skills Authority. The purpose of that is to really start to think about what are these future skills that people are talking to. What is it we need to do to support people into careers, not just jobs? What skills may they need that they may not have learnt at school? And how do we start to think about, well, how do they manifest in the workplace? So when we talk about future skills, we're thinking about things like digital skills, tech skills, cyber skills, the things certainly when I was at school I was not taught, and I think have become more and more relevant and more in demand. In fact, that's not just a northern demand, that's demand across the globe and certainly across the UK for those skills. So what can we as businesses do? Well, On our own, I think we're all doing different things. So we're reaching into communities that we serve. We are trying to talk to school leavers, businesses, communities, colleges, individually, and trying to support our local communities. But the reality is that the size of the skill gap means that individually we're making a drop in the ocean. And probably what we need to do is collaborate more in order to address the size of those skill gaps, to be able to make sure that what we're not doing is leaving places behind because we're falling over each other maybe in the same places. It's clear for us, and the report we've written will come out in autumn to talk more about this, and I'm under strict instructions not to give away all of the points
Go
of
on,
it.
go on.
Well, there's a man at the back who gets very angry with me when I threaten to do so. That collaboration for us is key, because actually without collaboration it is just too difficult to make a difference on your own as a small business. Businesses are doing great things, but on their own it's just not enough. We have to work together. We have to work with local governments in order to make a meaningful change in this space. And when you think about talent pipelines, somebody said, where do you start when you think about diversity in a talent pipeline? And I said, it's not where do you start, it's the fact you must never stop. So whether that's in recruitment, whether that's in succession planning, whether that's in retention, diversity of talent pipelines is the thing that will make a meaningful difference. It's important that people, the communities we serve, can be seen in the colleagues that are working with them. It's important that we're representative of the communities we're in as a building society, never more so. A couple of really just stark stats, and then I'll allow us to move on. But actually in Yorkshire and Humber, 47% of all women are classed as working in low-skilled roles. At senior levels, 19% of women hold senior digital roles in the North. I guess I'm quite odd because not only do I hold a digital role, but hey, I'm female too. But when you think about that, that's a massive differentiator. It's really, really important. They are just some of the diversity characteristics that we need to be embracing more in order to be able to see a true talent pipeline manifest. Conscious of time, so I'll allow us to move on. And I'm happy to talk any more about diversity in the workplace, the Skills Commission, the work we've been doing, if people want to hear more about it.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Tina. I will go to Joe next, I think. Joe, you are sort of out on the front lines, running an amazing charity. Tell us your perspective of all of this.
Thank you, Nathan. Morning everybody, you'll have to excuse me because as Nathan says I am from a small charity, so this is massively out of my comfort zone today, so I'm very nervous, so please bear with me. I have wrote down my points because if not I would probably sit here for 10 minutes and run away with myself, and that's not what we're here to do today. As Nathan said, I come from the seaside town of Reigniting, which is one of the most deprived towns in the East Riding, with families stuck in cycles of generational unemployment. As a coastal town, our employment opportunities are mainly seasonal, meaning that the job centre doors are constantly revolving, and many individuals and families in our town just can't be bothered with the hassle of moving between wages and universal credit. This attitude is passed down to young people. Education doesn't lead to anything, so what's the point? The current education system sets young people up to fail. In Yorkshire and the Humber, not even 25% of young people got higher level GCSEs this year, and only 22% received higher level A-levels. And this is reflected across the North as a whole. The current education system is set up for those children that learn well in academic environments. However, those young people that thrive in more practical environments don't stand a chance when they are faced with around 25 exams. Young people just cannot deal with the pressures, especially those that are from disadvantaged backgrounds. So they often choose to stay away from school altogether. One of our secondary schools has a less than 80% attendance rate, and many of those children not attending are at risk of becoming involved in child sexual exploitation, child criminal exploitation, including county lines, because it's easier to sell drugs and steal than it is to go into an environment that is demoralising. We have little to no alternative learning provisions, therefore many young people are leaving school with no qualifications because there's no incentive to do well in deprived areas, because what is there at the other side? Many of those that do attend are attending because they feel like they have to. They still have low or no aspirations and aren't brave enough to think about anything beyond their hometowns. We left a global pandemic and walked straight into a cost of living crisis. Children are going to school hungry. They couldn't care less about concentrating in class because all they're thinking about is lunchtime and getting their free school meals. There is a huge lack of upward mobility jobs in the most disadvantaged towns, and the current climate, even those individuals that do have qualifications and experience to work in these jobs struggle to afford to travel to them. The people we are supporting in Bridlington are facing issues such as homelessness, low incomes, barriers to services, addiction, poor physical and mental health and social isolation. This year as an organisation we have worked with 399 individuals on a one-to-one basis, and 353 of those were not in any education, training or employment. In addition to this, in our adult group sessions, we have worked with 173 individuals, of which 156 were not in any education, training or employment. We concentrate on reducing isolation, building long-term relationships and stripping support back to meet basic needs. How can we expect those that are in mental health crisis, that are at risk of homelessness or live in unsuitable environments, have poor mental health, suffer from addiction and have no education to look for employment when they are simply trying to get through the day and survive? Pre-pandemic, we gave out around 150 food parcels per year. So far this year, we have provided 730 food parcels to those most in need in our community, and these have helped to feed 918 adults and 619 children. In the year 2023, this should not be needed. At the Hinge Centre, we understand that a one-shoe-fits-all approach does not work, and we believe that in order to move someone towards employment, you need to address individual needs, starting with soft skills such as confidence, communication, positive decision-making and positive relationships, and look at developing other skills such as budgeting, managing a tenancy, healthy lifestyles and problem solving. Without these basics, people will not be able to progress onto anything more. We provide one-to-one appointments to support with money managing, maximising income, liaising with local authority, debt agents, landlords, supporting individuals and families to be able to stay in their homes, tackling threat of eviction and much more. We encourage positive relationships, social inclusion, confidence building and positive thinking within our adult group activities such as the budget cooking class, life hacks, men's meet and eat and healthy minds. As a result of this work within the last 6 months, 10 of those individuals that we have worked closely with have moved into volunteering opportunities within our organisation, and within the last week we were in a position where we could offer one of them some paid session work. My question to you is this: if you were worried about feeding your children, if your family was sleeping in one room together because you couldn't afford to heat your home, if you were relying on charities to help you top up your gas and electric, if you were sleeping in a tent or asking your children's school if they could shower there because you had no gas for hot water, would your first priority be finding a job?
Well, thank you, Jo. Esther.
Thank you very much indeed. Would my first thing be to look for a job if I was doing that? Yes, it would, because I believe in opportunities and getting the money, so it would be. But you're right, we need to make sure that the hand is going out to help somebody get that job, absolutely, without a doubt. Because hopefully that is what we're about, extending opportunities and giving other people a chance in life if we stand for anything. So this was about reigniting the northern engine. Well, I don't think we need reigniting, but I do think we need powering up. So I'm coming from that powering up. That northern engine. And Kevin alluded to something that I've always said: if you want the country to fly, if you want this country to soar, we need, like a plane, 2 engines. The engine of the south is buzzing and the engine of the north needs powering up. But what I will say, if you've been in Manchester this week, I don't know if you come from here or any of the northern cities, lots of people will have travelled from far and wide, but it is amazing. Look at the architecture, look what's going in. It is magnificent. And the great thing about some of these northern cities like Manchester, like Liverpool, like Leeds, like Hull across, yes, it's built on that Victorian heritage, but actually I'd now say they were very modern. So I would say we need to look to the future. So when people were talking about HS2, and I look at the amount of money that was going to be spent on that, the Labour peer, Lord Berkeley, said it would go up to 180 billion. So a single train line, and who uses train? 2% volume of the public, travelling 9% of miles, but we've got 180 billion pounds here. If I was to say to those northern towns, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham, give you all 45 billion, what would you do with that? Would you all club together and say, we'll just get a train line for a small percentage of people to go to London? Or would you say, do you know what? There's many other things we'd like to do here, and we'd like to look at the connectivity of the future. So yeah, we need to get around locally. The best bit for most of our towns is going to London. We can all get to London, but you know what? Getting from Liverpool right the way across to Hull, we're not too good at. We can't do that at all. Yeah. Getting from Cheshire into Manchester is tough. So when we're looking at that productivity, all the figures that Kevin said there, that productivity actually, that engine growth actually is not that we're isolated cities, isolated towns and villages. It's actually us all coming together as a united force to actually give us that sort of power and that strength. So that's what I'd say. And then I'd say look to the future. We want the connectivity that is fast, reliable broadband. We don't want to be jumping on a train at a very expensive price. Lord knows, could be £600 a return ticket on high speed too. We want to jump on a Zoom that we're there immediately and haven't paid too much for. That's what we want to do. So I say let's look to the future. These great cities, how do we power it up? It is by connecting them, but for the future. So I want young people you're talking about who might not have too much money, but if we give them, or the training, if we give them the confidence, they could possibly make a little business in their bedroom at a very low cost base. I'm saying let's look outward, let's look globally. We are an island and we've always been traders. So that's what I want to do. So it's powering up that northern powerhouse. But please, Manchester has more multi-millionaires than anywhere outside London. So does Cheshire. So please, we have greatness. We look at the Hut Group. There's only 4 unicorn companies in the country. One of those is from Cheshire. We do bioscience, technology, finance, cars, manufacturing. We do all that. Just at the moment, we're working in isolation, and we need to connect. And that is transport, connectivity, and building us up so that we can fire even better than before.
Amazing, Esther, thank you. And a very good, I thought we were going to get through the panel without talking about HS2.
I wanted to put it down
we almost got there. Right, questions from the audience. Who would like to ask the first question? Gentleman in the middle.
Is this on? Yeah. I was most interested to hear what Joe you had to say from the regarding education, and it's not the first time I've heard sentiment like that about children that aren't particularly academically gifted, but would do well in trades and maybe onto T levels and that sort of thing. So really, aren't you really looking for a return to grammar schools and grammar education? But this time get it right and not just put the academic people in grammar schools, but concentrate on what we used to call secondary moderns to be the powerhouse in the north.
Yeah, I think we need to be focusing on where children's skills lie specifically. I have 3 children, they are all multi-talented and they all learn in different ways. When you look at Bridlington specifically, obviously we only have 2 secondary schools. We're not a large town at all. We have 1 college, and that college is geared up around health and social care, beauty. There's a handful of maybe mechanic jobs and a couple of joinery jobs. Anything else, these young people having to travel outside of our town in order to access further education or education still at secondary school level, but I feel like we need more options for our young people to be able to access earlier on so that they can thrive in an environment that they're comfortable with, rather than them sitting there and panicking when they're faced with 25 to 30 exams. You know, one of my children, he's better with long-term coursework and maybe a test dropped in every now and again, rather than panicking and trying to scrape through to the end of something. Why can't we, you know, do this over a longer period of time rather than just one hit at the end?
Kevin, I wonder if you wanted to pick up on the point that Jo made in her opening remarks on the sort of academic versus practical versus sort of vocational education.
Totally. And a compelling, you know, I don't know if you're nervous, you didn't seem nervous at all, Jo, and I thought your whole presentation was absolutely compelling. And my mum was a social worker and she rehabilitated offenders, and lots of things you said, my mum would have said. So yeah, well done for the work you're doing. It's a vital part of what communities do to help each other. Nobody would argue we've got education right in this country, and of course many things are right about it, and universities I talked about earlier, there's fantastic schools and lots of academies doing wonderful things, but what I see, I don't think grammar schools are the answer, in my view. Other people would argue differently. I just think it's to go from where you want to go to from here is just such a long road. I think what we've got to get the mainstream education system working more responsively to the young people that are in their education programs. So, and streaming is part of it, which what grammar schools were. They streamed kids who have different abilities. So yes, of course, people should be taught in terms of their ability in academic terms. So you should have streaming in terms of forms in different subjects, and that went out of fashion for some reason at some point. But that's an efficient way to work within a school. And I went to a comprehensive school that worked like that, and it worked effectively. I think probably not for me, to be fair. I didn't do great at school, but I think what we're recognising now, and you said it in your question, is T levels. I mean, you use the word T levels, and that's what we've done to try and give more opportunity for people to stream people in different ways, not just academically. So now T levels stream people according to their vocational abilities as well. Absolutely right. And that leads on then onto apprenticeship. So at 16, you don't have to carry on at school. You can go and do an apprenticeship, earn while you learn. And they're so, I mean, you see kids on an apprenticeship and they're loving it. I meet them on the shop floor in engineering companies in my constituency and around the country, and they're loving what they do. But I'll tell you, when you ask them where they found out about it, very few of them say it's my head teacher or my school or my careers advice. It's usually a mate or an uncle, or my dad was a toolmaker, whatever else it is. And so we need the system itself to make sure they're directing people down these routes for apprenticeships. So so hugely important that we do that. And I think that probably requires some tweaking to how Ofsted look at schools to make sure that they do stream kids properly according to their ability. The other thing I'll say is business is crying out to get involved in the education system. They want to be able to work with their local schools and colleges to make sure the skills that people have when they come out of school and colleges meet with the needs of businesses. I met with Ernst & Young yesterday, and they just opened a new facility, a branch in Northern Ireland. So why do you go there to Northern Ireland? 1,000 people, going to 1,000 new jobs. So they got a grant for Northern Ireland, which is part of it, part of levelling up. You know, there are some incentives we need for businesses, but also they said the universities there are very good at being responsive to their needs in terms of their educational needs for the people they're coming into their workforce. So this joined up approach we need from business to further education, which devolution is a key part of. And I think, you know, we definitely will see that in Manchester. Hopefully, we'll see that more in Yorkshire, where we see more devolution. So that's a key to this as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Esther. Do you want to come in on that?
Well, I'll just make a quick point. Joe's spot on. We're all different. We all learn differently, and we all excel in different things. And now, if we were businesses, we talk about tailor-making stuff. We talk about bespoke, and yet we don't really do that with a child's potential. We have very old, I'd say, school ideas, and the school is being measured on its targets, but it's not being measured on a child's targets. So I actually think that we'll get education right when we actually look at what would be best for that child. And actually, there are so many things we can't find: carpenters, plumbers, tradespeople, all of this, because they think they've got to go down an academic path, One thing I will say, and I guess this has always been the dilemma, some parents would say, I don't want you to choose at the age of 14 what my child could do because I actually think they could do something else. But actually there is a whole cohort of people who said, you know what, you would be doing more for our children by allowing them to do that. So I think that is something we've got to juggle at, because I don't think that academic path is right for everyone, and I see so many very bright children getting bored in the classroom because actually they need to do it through the practicality of a job. So I think we are doing people a disservice there. So I think that's families coming together to say, I would like my child to go off in this more pragmatic, practical trade route as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. There's a question at the back, I think, in the middle. Tim.
Perhaps this is a question particularly to Esther and you, Kevin. I think the Conservative Party's commitment to the North is very genuine, but we seem to have gone through a whole number of different iterations. You know, we had the Northern Powerhouse, which was very much George Osborne's project. Theresa May seemed to want to call it something else. Then we had Levelling Up under Boris Johnson. Then Rishi Sunak came in, he wanted to sort of represent it. And that doesn't really help, particularly in the context of, you know, probably the cancellation of the HS2 leg to Manchester. You know, how do we reassure the North that amongst all this sort of chopping and changing and presentational differences, it's rooted in the party? Has there been a lack of intellectual debate? Has the parliamentary party been adequately involved, Esther? What's the explanation of why we haven't quite got, at the very least, our comms right on this whole topic?
Can I just broaden that a bit? I think there's obviously a question about the Conservative Party in the government, but then also for Tina and for Joe after that, I think there's probably a wider question about sort of, you know, the perceptions. Do politicians care about the North? You know, how's government viewed, that sort of thing. So we'll go to Kevin first, then Esther, and then I'll let you.
Great. There's actually one point that Joe, when you spoke earlier, you articulated very clearly. For some people in these situations, absolutely on a knife edge in terms of their finances. One thing you do not get if you go into a child doesn't get if you go into an apprenticeship, you lose your child benefit, where you don't if you stay in education, and that's a disincentive for people to take that vocational route. So something we definitely should be looking at. Tim, first question I asked, and Nathan will vouch for this, when I sat down here and I saw the title of the event today was the Northern Engine. Well, what happened to the Northern Powerhouse? I mean, Northern Power still exists, and these are labels, of course, but I think Levelling Up is still Levelling Up, and Northern Powerhouse is still Northern Powerhouse. Clearly, you've noticed we've seen change of leadership over the last couple of times over the last year or so too. Everybody's noticed that, and it's not been the easiest time, and business wants stability, and we haven't given it stability politically, for which I apologise to any business person, because that's not what you want to see. But we are where we find ourselves. Of course, leadership is important, and every leader's going to look at things slightly differently. And I think we're starting to see after the crises of COVID and the cost of living, we're starting to see the real Rishi now about what he wants to do and how he sees that levelling up agenda, which he still is massively committed to. So all those labels will stay the same, but of course he's going to look at these decisions in their own right. Look at some of the concerns of Lord Barclay and Esther and others about the spiralling cost of HS2. So that's a tactical decision rather than a strategic decision to bin levelling up, I think, is what we are. The changes to net zero were tactical decisions how you achieve the same end, not a binning of net zero. So phasing out or ending oil boilers in 26 was a complete stake in the ground with no basis to it. So I think that's a tactical decision to change that, which is the right one, I think. Now, we'll find out more about HS2, you more than me about a decision being made, but I totally agree with Esther. And Rishi said this to me, and we had discussions with this prior to Rishi having his meteoric rise in terms of his political status, but that Northern Powerhouse rail is far more important than HS2. You know, if you properly connect Liverpool, exactly what Esther said, Liverpool with Manchester, with Bradford, which is a worse served place in the north in terms of rail transport, you understand why people aren't using, and you know this, Esther, aren't using the rail in Bradford, because it's terribly badly connected. You know, per capita, this use is minuscule. With Bradford, with Leeds, with Hull, suddenly you've got that agglomeration effect across the north that could absolutely drive forward the economy across the north. But even when you've done that, it'll take time to build it, and it'll take time to have that effect. So you're talking 20, 30 years, but it'll be money well spent.
Great, Esther.
Well, sadly, we're very much based in the south, aren't we? And that's just the reality. London and round the south has been the centre for finance, media, politics. Therefore, there is just very much a focus on the south. Now, that I want the north to do better, but I don't want the south to do badly.
Absolutely.
I want the south to continue doing well. I just want us to catch up there. I do think it'd be great if we could have two centres, so we're not just, as I said, one centre for the whole country. It needs that north too, as I said before, to give it that balance there. So what do we need to do? Well, I mentioned that about connectivity, broadband, money going into that, so we can actually skip to being a futuristic part. Actually, there's a lot more that you can do for expansion, modernisation, to increase our productivity up here. So that's what I would focus on. As I said, that £180 billion that, as I understand it, government's saying what isn't spent on HS2, we're going to invest it in what the North needs, because unfortunately HS2 was the South telling the North what it wanted. Wasn't what the North necessarily wanted, because if we had got what we wanted, it was the connection across our big cities. No, it was them telling you what you wanted and then what we'd give you to connect you across the North. So I think it's listening to that. And then obviously I'm a Conservative, so I'd be looking at tax incentives. How do we have it that we can get new startups here with tax incentives? How do we get small, businesses setting up? How do we do that and supporting us with the exports here? So we have got greatness here, but it's a critical mass that we need now, and allowing the North to decide what it wants to do. The only unfortunate thing, if you look at the politics, it's very different politics. And I did write an article, what was the point of regional mayors in a way? It was another layer of government, many millions of pounds. But what I don't want to see is ding-dongs between central politicians with regional politicians. I want a streamlining with a vision where we're going. I don't want to be caught in arguments. And I think that 100%. Is what we need as well. A proper timetable of where we're going, but really use those tax incentives to get businesses set up here.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Tina?
I think everything they've said there is completely sensible. I mean, as a small mutual organisation, that collaboration is through everything. It's fundamentally what we were founded 160 years for, 160 years ago for. I wasn't there at the time. But fundamentally, I think the collaboration stems beyond just the connection for travel. We've talked about education a lot this morning, about how skills need to start with that softer skill foundation and build to enable people to have long-term jobs, careers and future in the North. I think it's hugely important. It's hugely important to us and many other organisations up here.
There's also a bit of snobbery, isn't there? I think there is between the North and the South. You might talk differently, have different accents or what have you. Yes. And I actually think we need to appreciate everybody's differences and not actually see that as some difference in that way or other. Would you say that was true? How people view you with accents and where you come from and what
Posh
have you?
voice at Peterborough.
Yeah, yes. So I just think, viva la différence. And actually, I can't believe I said that. But I did. See, that's how outward-looking I am. That's how all-encompassing I am. And I think that's what we need to do as a UK. We're a small place, geographically very compact, and actually we need to look at that and, and be confident in the North.
It takes me back to David Cameron's comments, actually. Remember he got caught on mic, off camera, saying he realised everybody in Yorkshire hated everybody else. He hadn't realised they also hated each other. That was about devolution, of course. So it's internally competitive even in Yorkshire, which is quite a good thing.
Oh, Liverpool, Manchester competitive.
Yeah,
but
absolutely,
actually, do you know what? We'd stand
It's
side
football.
by side.
Yes. I've just been given the 5-minute warning, so I'm going to try and get a couple of quick questions in. We'll take two, and we'll try and get some quick answers as well. Gentleman at the back, I think you have to wait for a microphone if that's okay.
Thank you very much, all our speakers. Isn't it really so that what we're observing here is that in the UK we live in a post-industrial age
we're a service and tech economy now, and the industrial activities that fueled the North 50, 100 years ago have moved on. And isn't it the case really that if we want to have a return to some of those sectors, we need cheap energy? And so with regard to reigniting the Northern Engine, I asked the question, should we be supporting renewable energy, which imposes massive indirect costs across the entire economy, and why aren't we fracking for gas, which can be a cheap feedstock for all the industry up in Teesside?
Brilliant, thank you, sir.
Thank
and
you.
then lady at the front.
Thank you. My question is about how we stop people who grew up in the north, which is like me. I know we talk about accents. My accent has waned very sadly. Grew up in Liverpool, but studied in London, now work in London. How do we stop the kind of flow of people growing up in places which they'd love to stay in, but they feel like they have to move away for to get the careers that they like?
Right, so we've got an energy question and then a sort of a brain drain question. Who would like to take that? Any of those?
I'm very happy to. Energy question. The solution to energy is we need lots of different sources of energy to suit our needs in the future. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with your point that somehow manufacturing is a days gone by in the north. And I said earlier, our manufacturing, in terms of its our league table of manufacturing, we've got at one place. And if manufacturing does well, it does well in the north, which is the manufacturing base really still is. What we need to focus on is high value manufacturing, and so advanced manufacturing plan is something we're working on right now. So the other thing I'd say is tech's wonderful, green energy is wonderful, and we want to do all those things, but we represent every single business in the UK. There are 5.5 million businesses in the UK. We still want to look after the butchers and the kind of the publicans and the brewers and all that kind of stuff, and people and clothes manufacturers. Two of the unicorns in the UK are a brewer, which is Brewdog, and a clothing manufacturer in Gymshark. It doesn't have to be all shiny new tech to have successful businesses in the UK. Fracking, I'm not going to go into. It's been the most contentious thing in my life as constituency MP because I was in favour of it, but most of my constituents weren't. The vocal ones weren't. So yeah, the vocal ones. Well, that's true. I would still be in favour of it. In terms of your point about the key is making sure opportunities are here. You know, Ben Houchin has a great saying here: is go far, stay near. You know, there's no reason why people can't have good jobs in the north as long as we do the right things in terms of policy making. Of course, public sector investment, because businesses can't do that, but make sure that private sector investment comes in at the back of it. So those are two things. Those two things come together, everything else is solved, including many of Jo's problems that she sees every day.
Go on, Jo.
I was just going to say, I don't think it's just about opportunities in the north. I think we need to look at opportunities in coastal towns as well, because I think sometimes it's the coastal towns that get forgotten, and they are the ones that don't have the opportunities. So there are opportunities in the north, you know, there are. My son, he's had to move 4.5 hours away for his apprenticeship, but it's up. He's in Barrow-in-Furness. So there are the opportunities, but he's still 4.5 hours away from us. You know, that's a long way, isn't it, for a young person to have to leave their family alone and step out into the scary world and face that when you're not just an hour down the road, for instance, you know. It's the same with the universities. We've got Hull and we've got York, which, yes, are just over an hour away from our hometown, but again, you're still talking about young people that lack the confidence, that lack the ambitions, and they think, oh, do you know what, okay, I'm going to give that a go. But I also know young people that haven't succeeded in that, and a couple of months into their university course have had to come back because that's where they are most comfortable.
Yeah. Right, Esther, Tina, 30 seconds each. Final comments as we're going to be chucked out.
Okay, well, I would say, I always said, sadly, Liverpool's greatest export were its people. And you proved the point. And you did change your accent, and I will ask you for why, because you felt you probably had to conform with other people, whether you'd admit that or not. That's what we do. and that's how we moved on. And I just hope that as we reignite and grow our engine, we can stay closer to home. But again, I believe in choice, and I moved however many hours away, so I'm not saying anybody has to stay where they are. People will go in search of what they want to, but I just want people to have the choice should they have wanted to have stayed wherever that they could, and that's what we need to do by reigniting this engine.
Brilliant, thank you. Tina, final word.
Oh, great. I think all the things we've said this morning show the passion and desire for making and continuing the igniting the North. I think businesses working and opening the doors to show and demystifying things like financial services, professional services is really, really important. I think, there are lots of great examples of people that did not go to university that are in and thriving, but we need to tell that story more. We need to help young people understand how that's an option for them. And I think if we can do that together in collaboration with all the other things we've talked about this morning, we can't fail but be a success.
Brilliant. Tina, thank you. The CSJ's events programme this morning is continuing in this room. Straight after this, Esther doesn't have to move. Esther is on our next panel as well, with not one, not two, but three former Secretaries of State for Work and Pensions, Ian Duncan-Smith, and then the current Secretary of State, Mel Stride, will be here for that event too. Then we have a further event later on, so do come back. But it just leaves me to say, panel, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.